Shabbat Shalom, everyone. About a month ago, I was in the ICU visiting a congregant, and a young man came in a short white coat. And the patient said, "Oh, Rabbi, you have to meet my favorite doctor." And the young man and I exchanged smiles because we both knew that the short white coat indicated that he was not yet a doctor, that he was a medical student. But given all the medications and the loopiness of this patient, we just smiled and nodded. You see, the white coat is actually very important because in a situation like the ICU, if something goes wrong, things start happening pretty quickly. And it's important that we recognize, that the personnel around the patient recognizes this is a not yet doctor. This is a person who isn't quite ready to make important medical decisions, and the white coat indicates that he's a novitiate of sorts. He's in transition. Now, remember, what was the question I asked before we started reading Torah? I said, where are the priests sitting during their ceremony? What did you notice? What did you see? They're sitting at the entrance of the tent. They're not yet inside the Holy Tabernacle. They spend the ceremony hovering in the doorframe, in the liminal space. They're getting ready to make a transition. And that's true of most of the major changes in life. I mean, Evan, you didn't just wake up one day and you were a bar mitzvah. Yeah, you've been studying at Levine Academy for many years, and you've been preparing with Mrs. Stein for many months. It was a transition that took time to be ready to say, I'm counted as a Jewish adult among the people in my community. So why do we need a liminal space or a ritual that involves time to help us make transitions? For that, I'd like to turn to a cultural anthropologist, Victor Turner. Here's what he writes. Liminality, being between spaces, is one of the most visible expressions of anti-structure in society. So here's what I think he means there. When someone makes a transition from being one state to another, it collapses society for a moment. We have to get used to the whippersnapper now being an authority. It takes some time to make that change. Yet even, he writes, yet even as it is the antithesis of structure, dissolving structure and being perceived as dangerous by those in charge of maintaining structure, it is also the source of structure. So while it might make us uncomfortable to see the youth become the authority, while it might play with the structure of society for a moment, we need it to happen because in the case of the medical student, as doctors retire, we need more new doctors. Just as chaos is the source of order, he writes, liminality represents the unlimited possibilities from which social structure emerges. In other words, part of why we need transitional space to go through a life change, like a not quite yet priest becoming a priest in the tabernacle, is that society is going through the change too. It's not just about the person experiencing the transition, it's everyone around them learning to see the person in a new light. Now that we've looked at cultural anthropology, let's switch to Torah. There's a 19th century Polish rabbi by the name of Joshua Trunk, and he notices that where the priests sit for the 7 days is exactly the place where we put our mezuzahs. They're sitting in the doorframe, which, by the way, the whole point of mezuzah is that as you walk through the liminal space, you can change who you want to be, right? You can think about, as I enter my home, who am I going to change myself into being to be in my sacred space by just taking a moment to kiss the mezuzah and take a breath and think about it. So the priests are sitting in the space where we would hang a mezuzah, and Rabbi Trunk brings a piece of Talmud with us about the mezuzah. He says, in the world of flesh and blood, in the world of human beings, the king sits on the inside, and his servants guard the outside and keep him safe. But, says the Talmud, It's the opposite with the mezuzah, because it reminds us that we, the servants of God, are on the inside, and the King of Kings is on the outside, keeping us safe. That is also the role of the priest. They sit at the edge of the tent, they look outward to remind themselves that this is not just about you, priests. This affects an entire community. Your job is to guard that community, to be godlike in the sense that you will help them make kapara, that you will help them make atonement. You have to constantly look out to the world. So during their 7-day transition, they're being reminded, this isn't about you, this is about the community. Perhaps in our world, it would be when one of us gets a promotion professionally. While there's glory for the individual and we feel very proud of being recognized for our achievements, the reminder in the transition from worker B to manager B is it's actually about the others, and your job now is to help take care of other people. A second point that I'd like to make is found in the Yerushalmi, another kind of Talmud. It notes the length of time that the priests are sitting in the space, which is 7 days. And the Yerushalmi says there, from where do we learn to sit Shiva for 7 days? Where do we learn that we should sit in mourning for 7 days? From this moment when the priests are sitting in the tabernacle. Now, at first, this makes no sense. It's an ordination. It's a joyous occasion. Why should we associate mourning with it? But the truth is, as we move through transitions, as we become something else, there is also loss, even if the transition is a joyful one. The priests, while they're gaining a lot of honor in the community and, like I told him, fancy clothes and a lot of good eats, they're also going to lose something, which is the rules for the Levites, for the priests, are much, much stricter around the separation between purity and impurity, and they will know some losses because of losing that freedom. I think in our world, anyone who's ever gotten married and has had to part with some beloved objects or habits in order to make that union work can sympathize that even though it's very joyful to get married, there is a loss, and if we don't take time to mark it and think about it, we might not make the transition successfully. My third and last point comes from Rashi. He's a medieval commentator. So Rashi says, he picks up on the line that says, you should do the ordination exactly the way it's described, lest you die. Pretty serious. And Rashi says, unless you be deserving of death. So what is it that the priest could do that is deserving of death if he doesn't follow the directions seriously and fully and completely with his full attention? Well, if you can't sit through the 7 days correctly, how are you going to serve the people correctly? Because just like the medical student becoming a doctor is going to be making some serious decisions, the priest is too. The priest's role was to create a way to atone, to get rid of sin. As Evan said, you can't sit there dwelling, feeling horrible forever. The ritual really released people's feelings of guilt. So I would say perhaps a transition in the human world might be the one from addiction to sobriety. That is a difficult transition to make, and when we're in that liminal space, there's a lot of hard work that one has to do to get ready to emerge in the world. It's a way of building skills to know that you will be able to handle it. The reason the priests sit in the opening of the tent is to give them time to change and to give the society around them process to recognize the change. And one of the things I love about the Torah is this Torah portion is one that gives B'nai Mitzvah students nightmares. It seems so dry and so foreign at first. But if we look at just this one detail, and I could have picked hundreds of others in this parsha, the message that it is talking to us about this morning is, how do you successfully make changes? I think we got to see one this morning. We're very proud of you. And so my blessing for us all is that when we face a time of transition, just like the priests did in times of old, we will take sufficient time to sit in the liminal space and be ready for the change. Shabbat Shalom.